All right. Action. We're live. Okay, so let's just do a short recap. Again, we're talking about the difference between the spies that Yehoshua sent in the Haftorah versus the spies that Moshe sent in the Torah portion. The main difference between them, the two of them, is on 2 points. One, Yeshua's spies were sent only to spy out Yericho. It's called the lock of the land. They weren't sent to the whole land. And it was an actual commandment from Hashem through Yehoshua for them to do so. Moshe's spies were sent to the entire land, but it wasn't a commandment. Shalach lecha l'daitecha ani eni matzava lecha. We found 2 girsas, so we were right yesterday also. So Moshe says, God tells him, I'm not commanding you, you send them on your own. We explained, what does this mean? That in the conquest of the land, this is something eternal and perpetual, even after the physical land is conquered. So Hashem should be finished the job soon. Even after the physical land is conquered, we have the spiritual land. And the spiritual land is comprised of 2 basic parts of our, so to speak, spiritual anatomy. That is our midos, which is our essential self, more or less, which is likened to the nations of Canaan. There's 7 midos, right? Chesed, Gevurah, Tiferes, Netzach, Hod, Yesod, and Malchus. These are corresponding to the nations of Canaan. And there are the levushim, which is the thought, speech, and action. And so when it comes to the conquest of these lands, we know that only a tzaddik has the ability to conquer his midos, i.e. spy them out and transform them at that deep level. A regular person or aspiring Beinani, he doesn't have the ability to go so deep into itself to actually transform his midos. It's beyond his free choice to a certain degree. And therefore, he can't be commanded to do so. But what he can be commanded to do is, of course, refine his garments. And therefore, Yericho, the city of Yericho, represents the concept of garments, because we have a Zohar, Recha de Levushaychu, that there's the scent of the garments. We explain why the garments represent the thought, speech, and action. And so they're as connected with scent, Yericho. So therefore, Yeshua's spies were commanded, because there is the power inside of every single person, right, to conquer their thought, speech, and action. They are in the possession of man, and you can own them, right? And so we said, however, and this is sort of where we left off, interestingly enough, we still see that in the Torah, which is Lashon Hora'ah, which is a lesson, it does speak about the spies of Moshe, right? And so we have to take a lesson from this, that also we have something to do with spying out our actual midos and taking care of the bigger, much deeper job, because otherwise we wouldn't have been told in Moshe's Torah. And there's a few other sort of references to this concept. One is that we are swearing before we come into our bodies, right? The soul above swears before it gets into the world. It's the first lines of the Tanya, Mashbim osoti tzadik valti rasha, we swear to be a tzaddik. So even though we just got through saying the ability to perform this transformation of the midos is really within the tzaddik's power, and not everyone has the merit to hold such a power, nonetheless, you swore to do so. And not only that, but the commandment to conquer the land is one of the 613 commandments, which means it's shaykh to every single Jew. And so we're now trying to grapple with this idea that we are actually intended to go and conquer our midos, albeit not with the force of a command, but nonetheless with the force of a horah, with some kind of an instruction, even though Hashem is not commanding us, right? That's where we left off. We're going to take it from Os Hey. Nachum, that was for you, basically, a little intro. All right. So, Os Hey, Hine Hatam Lezeh. The reason for this, that the thoughts, speech, and action are within the possession of men, under our control, in other words, as opposed to the midos of the heart, right? Because simply we said they're the garments of the soul. Just like the analogy, we call them garments. Let's flesh out that analogy further, just like garments that you place upon your body. Even though they're definitely necessary, you wouldn't want to go around naked for several reasons. One, mitzad inyan atznius, right? Kevan yizboshashu, Maybe someone could hit the AC. That would be so nice. Thank you very much, David. One is you need garments because since the Garden of Eden, it just hasn't been that smooth going naked, right? It says that we were embarrassed of our nakedness. We ate from the tree, and all of a sudden we came into the realization that there might be something a little bit not so great about being naked. So you need garments from the standpoint of tznius. And also practically speaking, not just for a spiritual reason, but without garments, stub your toe, right? You have to protect yourself from cold and heat. The garments are actually practical. So a person needs his garments. However, you can take them off. It's within your ability to take them off. You're not stuck with them. And certainly, even though you need garments, you're not stuck with the garments that you have on right now, right? So even though you need them, they're more or less transferable. You can definitely switch them with other garments. That's why the analogies of Chassidus are pretty much exact, meaning to say that just like garments in all the details we just said, so too the garments of your soul have all those same qualities, right? Halavushim, dibur, and maisa. When it comes to the garments specifically of deed and speech, or speech and deed, those you can actually even take them off, right? You're not forced to even wear the garments of speech and deed. If you want to, you can shtok, you can be quiet. If you want to, you can just lie still, right? You don't have to basically engage yourself in wearing those garments of deed and speech at all. But what about machshava? Machshava you cannot take off, right? In fact, this is sort of a principle that we learn about, that you cannot actually stop your thoughts. Even there's this idea of sort of quieting your mind. As far as Chassidus is concerned, the mind is called a river, and the river can never really stop being on. Chas v'shalom, if that would happen to you, it's not boding well, right? Your thoughts are flowing continuously, so you can't actually take them off like you can your speech and your deed. However, gam machshava shehi b'tmidus, even though machshava is continuous, nechlefes b'machshava acheres, you can switch it. So this is like the analogy we just said. You can take your garments off, and if not take them off, you can certainly switch them with other garments, right? So two thoughts, and this is what it really means for a Beinani to have control of his thoughts, is that, and this is kind of one of the grand principles of the whole Tanya, is that you have control to think about what you want to think about. What you don't have control over, as we've been saying, is the initial thought, right? Unless you have hesech hadas lagamre, which we spoke about yesterday, sort of like different levels of your mastery of this skill of diverting your thoughts, which can get very, very sophisticated to the point that it could seem like you're a tzaddik, even though you're not. But essentially, what we usually say is the first thought that arises is not really under your control. Why? Because you don't have control over your midos. And your midos will be our human midos, let's say, if you're lucky, and you're going to have some kind of a drive, of a lust, of a jealousy, all the negative midos that you have not yet completely done away with. They're burning inside of you, and so they will sort of try to give their vote, and they'll throw out a expression, which the first place it will come to is in your thoughts. But what you can do is switch your thoughts. You're in control of your machshava. So as soon as it comes, you don't have to wear that, not even for a second. So the first real move of a practitioner of the Hasidic ways, right, the Jewish ways, is that you don't allow the thought to just stay in there and germinate and marinate, and essentially that's up to you. So the fact that you're going to just go on a loop mode and allow yourself to be obsessive about any particular thought, that's the part where you can't blame you weren't born a tzaddik, right? That's up to you to nip that in the bud. And that's what it means. You can change your thoughts to the point that you can even have hesech hadas, can even completely remove your attention from them, and even lagamre, like we said yesterday, even entirely, to some level, you can actually master this. Therefore, bichdei l'shanosam, I think I skipped something. Yeah, I did. So Masha Einkein, you see that second line? Masha Einkein as-seichel v'amidos. Not so the seichel and the midos, harihim mahus hanefesh. Right? They are the actual mahus hanefesh. You're going to see there's a footnote shooting you to the Tanya, and then later on in the end of that footnote, it shoots you to the Torah or Rosh, the beginning of Parshas Vayera. So I want to speak about the difference between those two references of this statement, because it says these not so the intellect and the emotions, you can't change them and you can't take them off because they are the mahus hanefesh. What does it mean, the mahus hanefesh? What is mahus? Yes, you might say the essence. There is, right? But we're talking about the there's two words in Chassidus that are used oftentimes together as a pair, and that's metzias and mahus, right? So the metzias of something is its existence, that it's found. The word metzias means to be found, and mahus comes from the word mahu. What is it? Right? So not just that it is there, but what is it? Its actual essence. So we're talking about the idea of the mahus hanefesh, the what is it of the soul, the actual essence of the soul. And here he says the intellect and the emotions are the essence of the soul. So before we go off into a little tangent, I just want to point out that's compared to the body. If the garments are your thought, speech, and action, then the intellect and the emotions, which is your 10 spheros, your intellect is your chabad, your emotions is your 7 spheros. That's called the actual body of the soul, which is called the mahus hanefesh. And therefore, just like a body, you are stuck with it. The one you have now is the one you're going to have tomorrow until you're done, right? You can't take it off. You can't switch it with another one. It's basically ingrained, and that's what it means. You can't change it. And since you can't change it, you don't have so much control over what you were dealt. And that's why, unless you're a tzaddik who can change their body, right? This is kind of the wondrous level of a tzaddik. They can essentially have access to such a deep level of transformation on themselves. They can actually change and work on their midos. Everybody else is left with more or less the body that you were delivered. And that's why the analogy is of a body, because just like your body, you can't change, right? You can't change so easily. You can have surgeries. You can take off weight. You can build yourself up into a bodybuilder. You can change your body, but it's not like changing your thought, speech, and action. It's an awesome, intensive labor, which is, again, not necessarily even in your control. So now just one small point I wanted to bring out. We're calling the intellect and the emotion the essence of the soul. In this mimer in Torah Or from the Alter Rebbe, he explains that there seems to be a bit of a contradiction. Actually, there's a note of the Tzemach Tzedek there that points out this contradiction. Because on one hand, the Alter Rebbe actually calls the intellect and the emotions themselves garments of the soul. And the essence of the soul is something which is even deeper beyond the intellect and the emotion. Whereas in the Tanya, and he's quoting the Tanya here, he calls the intellect and the emotion the essence of the soul, and the garments are merely the thought, speech, and action. So it turns out there's actually 3 levels of the soul. There's the real essence of the soul, which is completely beyond intellect and emotion. What's the intellect and emotion? It's the 10 spheros. So before your soul basically takes the form of a supernal body of 10 spheros with intellect and emotion, it has a previous state of being, which is like a singularity. It's a oneness. The real soul doesn't have any form at all. Just like God. God has 10 spheros, but at some deeper level, before Hashem takes the form of a man, Hashem has no ein tmuna, right? There's no form and there's no nothing. So it's your soul also follows the same pattern. So therefore, if you want to say the true essence of the soul, it's actually the 10 spheros themselves would be like a garment. Because the body, in a certain sense, is a type of garment, right? The body itself garbs the soul. The 10 spheres themselves garb the soul. However, that type of garbing that goes on with the 10 spheros is different type of garbing. Is that a word? I'm going with it. It sounds like a word at this moment. It's a different type than the ones that are the analogous to the clothing garbing the body. Right? So the way that the body cloaks the soul is of a fundamentally different way than the clothing cloaks the body. And therefore, what is the difference, first of all? And this is also a very deep concept, like if you take this as into the analog of Hashem and his 10 spheros, the way that the oneness of Hashem gets cloaked by the Esser spheros of Atzilus, right? Which it's a type of garment, but we call it, that type of garment, the body. And basically from here we see there's something called garments that reveal versus garments that conceal. The body and also the 10 spheros are called garments that reveal. Because essentially what the 10 spheros do is they actually give you an insight, a window into what is God. Because when he's in a state of singularity, before he comes into any spheros, he's basically unknowable. So by coming into the body, it actually gives Hashem an ability to reveal himself. So the body is therefore called garments that reveal. I now know that he's, so to speak, can express himself as mind and heart, etc. These are like the attributes of Hashem. Whereas the garments that are then placed on that body, just like our garments, they actually cover the body. And so too, the garments of your thought, speech, and action are actually like wrapped around and covering your actual essence of your soul. If we look at this in the Seder Ishtalshelus model, we have basically 3 levels where you have the essence of Hashem, the world of Atzilus, and then what's Hashem's thought, speech, and action? Bria. Bia, Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya. So the whole idea of all the worlds and everything is essentially the same things that God is likened to a man. On one hand, you have the essence of the soul. Then you have Hashem's body, which is the 10 spheros, where he cloaks himself. But those are called garments that reveal, because now Hashem is the world of emanation, and he's manifested himself so that you can essentially get a glimpse into what godliness is. That's a level of godly revelation. And then you come with the Bria, Yitzira, and the Asiya, which is his thought, speech, and action of literally of God. The world of Bria is Hashem's thoughts. The world of Asiya is Hashem's actions. And so the idea is that these really conceal Hashem. Once you have the Bria, now you have this concept that there's something other than God, right? So the world of Atzilus does not conceal Hashem, it reveals Hashem. There's no concept that now that I have 10 spheros, I have something other than God. That's why it's called the world of emanation. There's no other. The Bria is where the other starts. Now I have a creation and a creator. In the world of emanation, there's no one else there. It's just God as a guy, right? So he's basically showing you himself with form, but there's no concept that I would take that to be something other than God, right? It's the man sitting on the chariot. It's the godliness itself. So you could see how thought, speech, and action, Bria, Yitzir, and Asiya, are basically imposing some kind of an other on you. The fact that you all of a sudden have thoughts, you ever notice like you're talking to yourself? You know, you're having a conversation with yourself. How many of you are there? Right? So too with Hashem, once he has like a thought, which is sort of something other than himself, it's the Bria, it's the creation, it has this form of other. And then the formation and the action, etc. So anyway, back inside the Mimer, all we're saying is the Rebbe is actually kind of making it simple here. I complicated things because of this footnote. But here the Rebbe is saying that it is relevant to say that the intellect and the emotion are actually the essence of the soul, even though really they're the body which cloaks the essence. And the reason is because that body which cloaks the essence is such a unification that there's really not two things there. And that's the difference. The type of cloaking that the body does is essentially different than the type of cloaking that the clothing do. Why? Because the clothing do not become alive. When the soul goes into the body, it's not that you have like a little robot with a little life force like driving it under controls. They become one. You have a living body. So therefore, when Hashem comes into the 10 spheros, it's those 10 spheros, you can call them God also. Right, because he fuses with those spheros to such a that they become basically infused as one thing. So too, therefore, the 10 spheres of your soul, you can call them the essence of your soul, even though there's a deeper level of the essence. But it's not wrong to call the seichel and the midos the mohus hanefesh, is where we jumped off into this point, because the unification between your essential soul and your mind and your heart is like a body with a soul becomes one, a living singular entity, at which, mind you, you can't change, right? That's the point. That's the point we're actually holding. V'lechein, back inside. V'lechein bichdei l'shanosam, if you want to change them, tzrich liyagia. You can, like we said before, it's an insane level avoda to actually change your midos, as opposed to your thought, speech, and action.
Why would you want to if you just said that you're a perfect reflection of yourself?
That's God's. You also have an animal. You have also an animal soul, right? So basically, when it comes to Hashem, there's sort of like a perfect unification. This is the Shem Yud Kei Vav Kei, right? The name Yud Kei Vav Kei is the Spheros of Atzilus, and in this name, Hashem is like perfectly expressed. When it comes to that name, then getting plunked into a lower level, so then we have sort of midos that are coming from L'umat, from the other side. So our godly soul is perfect. That doesn't need to be changed. The problem is the animal soul, and that's what's trying to be changed.
So what is the name becoming Bria?
Say it again.
There's just a name in Atzilus. What happens to the name in Bria?
The name in Bria is passing through a filter of Elohim. So basically, you don't really see the name in Bria, right? That's why we don't say Hashem's name in the way it's spelled, right? We basically call him another way than we write him, because his actual name is sort of untouchable in the Bria. When there's a Beis Hamikdash, right? So then we can actually say his real name, because the Bria sort of opens up its flower and allows the true name to be seen. But all during the Gullus, we can't actually say Hashem's name because it's elusive to the Bria. It's in Atzilus. Just what? Sometimes, like in a Sefer Torah or in a Yid, or when there's a Beis Hamikdash and there's Gilui Elokus, you can actually, the Bria can actually reveal Hashem. Just like, for example, a person has perfect garments, the garments will reveal the soul, right? It's like when your garments are, that's why Talmid Chacham can't have torn garments and blemished garments, because the garments can block we got to get that door closed a little bit. Yeah, the garments can block if they're not in perfect organization, which means it's gullus, they can't perform the mitzvahs to their perfection, then the Bria blocks the expression of the Havaya to come through. Fine. In order to change them, you have to do this tremendous yigiyah, this toil, to the point that it's actually not really on you to do it on yourself. As we said before, you can swear to be a tzaddik for a certain reason. It's because you can try to become a Beinoni, and that's within your control, and then kuli hai v'ulai, like it says in the Tanya, if you do all that, maybe the soul of a tzaddik will sort of impregnate you, and therefore you can actually change your midos, but that's something that you need a tremendous amount of toil and a special empowerment from above. It's not totally in your control. You have to try, because you have to do the part that you can do in order to receive this gift from above. If you don't do your part, you won't receive the gift. But even if you do all the yigiyah and toil, you still need an empowerment from above, as we said yesterday. Yeah?
So the toil is in regards to the garments, the thought.
Yeah.
Right? But at the same time, you're supposed to also refine the garments of speech and action, right? And speech, action, and thought. So the toil, you just said, is for the midot of the heart. And then at the same time, you have the garments, which is the external aspect that you have to refine. Yeah. So you're doing those at the same time, because in a way, the garment, like you could argue, if the midot of the heart aren't a perfect expression of my soul's essence, and what's the point of refining my garments that are just going to be refined onto the imperfect expression of my soul?
We're basically, what we're trying to do here is spy them out, right? In other words, the conquest of the actual land, what we're talking about right now is the sending of the spies. So you're looking to have a look at your actual self to see how it could be conquered. I mean, it's an interesting point you're making. I mean, the real toil that we can do essentially is the toil of the thought, speech, and action. When he says, in order to change your body, you need toil.
That's not the heart. That's the toil that everybody can do. This is the level of
I think the toil goes on Yehoshua, but then the point is that there's this nesinas koach. There's this empowerment that you need to get blessed with in order for your toil to actually make inroads to your heart. Yeah, through the levushim.
Like from the outside in.
Yeah. That's usually the way to get in from the outside.
Right.
Okay. Vav. No, but I hear you, yeah. let's think about that. I hear what you're saying.
Like put on some nice clothes, like some athlete clothes, and eventually you'll start getting muscle. Right.
You gotta fake it to make it.
Exactly. So you might look really fat in the beginning of it.
Vayishlak. We can say, the Indian zeh shamachshava dibur ma'isa hem levushim. This, that the thought, speech, and action are garments. Hugam atamim al zeh she'inyan demachshava dibur ma'isa nogeh yoser ma'amidos. The fact that they're garments is also amongst the reasons why we say, interestingly, because this is counterintuitive, that the thought, speech, and action are more nogeya than the midos. In other words, they matter more. Again, counterintuitive, you would think like the main thing to work with is your midos. But we're saying is the fact that they're garments is amongst the reasons why they matter more, the thought, speech, and action. What does it mean? The fact that what's really required from your basic garden variety Jew, right? How many tzaddikim are there really? It's not, the Torah was, and the world was not created for the tzaddikim in truth, because there's so few, right? So the fact that the reality is they're just here to help us get our job done. So since every Jew, like the Torah ala rov tedaber, the Torah speaks to the majority, is really those who are not even relevant to be in the category of tzaddikim, our main work is the avodah of machshava dibur ma'isa, right? Since this is the ikar thing that's being demanded from every Jew, is the thought, speech, and action. Who lo rak mipnei shehem b'reshuso kanal. It's not only because Nebuch, poor you can't do the real work, so I'll give you some garden work to do, right? In other words, you might think that the main reason why your main work is with your thought, speech, and action is because that's the only thing you have access to. But it's not like that. In other words, the other way around. The main reason why that's all you have access to is because that's the main work. Right? Elegam the fishi zed nogeya yoser. It's more important. It's like it's a more godly ticket to heaven, basically, than the midos themselves are. Even they seem more external. The Yuvan zebehektim amavur bakam makom. We'll understand this by first prefacing what it says in many places. Jerry brings footnotes to that effect. Be'inyan halavushim, regarding the garments, the shorash halavushim ulamaylim is shorash ha'adam hamaluvesh bahem. Right, that actually that which falls lower is really higher, or that is which is higher falls lower. I guess that's the proper way of saying it. Right, meaning to say these things which seem external, and it's like, oh, Nebuch, all you have to, you're only on a level where you can get your hands on the thought, speech, and action. The reality is you have your hands on something which is greater than the body which is wearing those clothes. The garments which fall lower and become external, and they become so much, even if you look in sort of in the realm of godliness, what is the garments? The bri yitzir asiyah, right? Which is the part of godly existence which goes so far away from him that it no longer is recognizable as godliness. Because when you talk about the essence of the soul, obviously it's godliness. When you talk about the 10 spheros, we just got through saying there's this wondrous unity of the essence of Hashem with his 10 spheros. Those 10 spheros, all they do is show you godliness. When you get to the Bria, and how much more so the Yitzira and the Asiya, and then even the Asiya Gashmi, you're dealing with, it's all godliness, right? The clothes are also God. It's just that the clothes are hiding their godliness and looking like godliness that shows up as something else. So this idea that godliness can present itself as something which looks like the opposite of godliness, like a concealment of godliness, that's only possible because it comes from a very, very high source, which has the ability to fall so low. And so is the same truth with your own soul. Your garments of your soul, your thought, speech, and action, they have fallen to a point where they look like there's something separate and concealing to yourself. They're just like, so to speak, hot air, literally exhaust. They're not even part of you. You say a word and you can walk away from it. It has nothing to do with you. Your body, you're stuck with your arms and legs, right? So they're obviously arms and legs are you. You know, if I'm going to throw a ball in the air, one-time action, carrying the koach of my maisa into the air, opposing gravity, and the ball falls, I walk away in my life. It didn't. Seemingly, it's like nothing, right? It's an aspect of energy from you which is likened to nothing. It turns out in that minimized life force, it comes from such a high force, such a high source, that it is actually higher than your body and your soul itself, the garments. For Hashem to cloak himself into something so low and so distant it requires the greatest source. And if you think about it, it makes sense. Like the fact it is like a superpower. The fact that you can project something from yourself to the outside world, right? It's like a magical thing. You don't just walk around bearing your own sort of Dalet Amos. You can eject, powers that shoot out of you. We don't think about it like this, but essentially, right now we're speaking to literally the whole world in theory, right? I can throw a ball. I can like shoot energy out of my body and carry something to defy gravity. It's seemingly a small thing compared to my body, but the very fact that it can have extension beyond myself itself shows that it's a very high thing. Umaylazo, this quality of the garments, that they're higher than the man themselves, shemitzad shorshim, which comes from the root of those garments, right? In their expressed level, of course, they're lower than the man himself. But the point is that in their root, where they come from, they have a higher source. Nikeres behem gam la'achar shenimshechu lamata. But you can make out that the source is higher even in their lowly state when they're in a state of garment. So I'll give you for an example of this. We say also like the earth, right, which is essentially seemingly lower than the man, right? In other words, if you go through the levels of what's called datzcham, domem tzomeach chai and medaber, you know what that is? Inanimate, growing animal and man. Man towers over all the rest of creation in terms of like his sophistication, etc., etc. Certainly over the domain, which is the mere earth, right? Which is basically this dumb entity which does not even grow. It's not even on the level of growing, certainly not on the level of animation of an animal. And yet, what do we see? You walk all over this earth, and so you're so much higher than it, right? If you think for a second how ridiculous it is, think how big the earth is compared to you, right? It's like it's not even like on in the scale, right? You basically don't exist. So this thing which you're so towering over, and you just walk on it like it's nothing. The fact that it's called domain, really, which means actually we call inanimate objects domain, which is very. Domim is blood. It has a source of that, but really the word dome means to be silent, right? And to be silent goes on a very, very high level of bittul. It's the opposite of medaber, right? Medaber is you got a lot to say over there, big fella, right? But the reality is that when the silence means you're just like humbled before the Creator because you're in the presence of such awesomeness, and really, therefore, you're a good. I don't know how many times bigger the earth is than a man, but it's a lot. It's a huge number. Because really, it has a higher source than the man, right? Hashem's essence is found in that place, but the problem is that when it shows itself in the express sense, it falls lower. It becomes domim. It becomes basically inanimate, which looks like the opposite of God. But in its source, it's higher, and you can even make out in its express state aspects of it which are higher than man. Its size, its ability to grow things from nothing, right? It's humility that anyone could just walk on it and it doesn't say anything. It accepts all embarrassment, etc. So even in the point we're trying to make here is, I'm just using the earth as an analogy, that we're really talking about the garments. Even as they come out in their express state where they're lower, you can still make out in them aspects of their source which are higher. What'd you say?
The stone has so much Yerushalayim that it's petrified.
Petrified. So we gave a beautiful analogy regarding the earth. What about clothes? How do we see that clothes have a higher source than man, even in their lower fallen state? Because makifin ala adam, they surround you. In other words, basically they're all over you, right? They basically encapsulate you, and they add to you. Mosifim bo yofi v'tiferes. They give you. Right, the clothes make the man. Even in other languages, we have such a statement, which means you're not made man unless you have clothes. So you see, the clothes basically give the man something he doesn't have on his own. He gives him beauty and tiferes. Look at the levushi hakodesh, right? Aaron HaKohen becomes and takes the status of the greatest man on earth and can become a Kohen just by putting on those clothes. In other words, if you lose a Kohen Gadol, if you don't have the Shemen HaMishcha to anoint him with new oil, which we lost at a certain point, how do you mamish make a new Kohen Gadol? You put clothes on him. All of a sudden he becomes the pristine greatest man on earth because of the clothes. As it says, Rabbi Yochanan Kari Lamane Michbudasa. He would call his clothing his glory, right? He would call his clothing his glory. Because clothing, strangely, in its source, is higher than the man himself. And so it is on a spiritual plane. Our thought, speech, and action are higher than our midos. And that's why your average Jew is only busy with them and not his midos. It's not just because Nebuch, you're not high enough to work on your midos. Hashem created a scenario where you're not high enough to work on your midos because he wants you to focus on the real gold, which is in your thought, speech, and action. The shorsh levushim l'mayla ma'nefesh v'lechein, right? Isn't that crazy? The source of your garments, your thoughts, are higher than your soul itself. V'lechein. And therefore, through the thought, speech, and action of these 613 mitzvos, which are basically the garments of the soul, right? Your soul itself, it can't do mitzvahs in the higher world, right? There's no mitzvahs l'mayla, only here. Which means when you come into a goof and you have thought, speech, and action, how do you do mitzvahs? With thought, speech, and action. No one's requiring you to have, like, love and fear are nice, right? They basically are sort of like the hidden source which is going to get you up and moving to put on the garments. The love and fear, your inner state. But the reality is, love and fear alone is just like a prerequisite to the mitzvah. The mitzvah itself is thought, speech, and action. The mitzvah itself, lashon tzavtza v'chibor, is God, basically, right? Hashem is united with his mitzvah. You know the word mitzvah, I think we discussed this in a previous class, in atbash, right? What's atbash?
You take the first letter and the last letter, switch.
Right? You invert the alphabet, you know about atbash? So what is mitzvah in atbash, at least the first two letters? Mem, tzadik is yud and hey, right? So mitzvah is yud k, vav k. And basically when you're doing a mitzvah, you're bringing the level of Yud Ke Vav Ke and building it into this world. You're wearing godliness. So the idea is that the thought, speech, and action of the 613 mitzvahs, which is what your godly soul, when it comes to this world, then has the schus of putting on. The godly soul above does not have access to the levushim. It's only when it comes into this world it can have the thought, speech, and action of the mitzvahs. Therefore, it gets to have access to the source of the garments, which is essentially the essence of Hashem, right? We just got through saying the garments come from a state which is higher than the soul. So for the soul to have an elevation higher than itself, it has to come down here in order to have access to these garments. When it has access to the garments, they unleash the power of their source, and you're suddenly enclosed, wrapped inside of a godly essence which comes from higher than your own soul. Amazing. Next level. Nice aliyah b'neshama. When you put on the garments of the 613 mitzvahs, your soul has an aliyah. It goes up, right? Even though you're going down into these external expressions. You go higher than the soul is in and of its own. In other words, what we're saying here is that, let's look at it on the God scale. You have the essence of Hashem, you have the world of Atzilus, and then you have the world of Bria Tzir Nasiya, right? So when the world of Atzilus is just sitting in Atzilus, hanging out in Atzilus, it's a step down from the Atzmus, which is above it, right? And it obviously so, right? Because basically the Atzmus above it is godliness as a singularity. If you're going to try and stick that into a body, obviously there's a tremendous tzimtzum that goes on there. And now you're looking at 10 spheros and you're defining Hashem, Chochmah, Bina, Das. Of course, that's finite compared to infinite. So certainly, even though we said that the world of Atzilus is still godly, it doesn't look like something separate, but it certainly does not hold the same godly level as the world, as the essence above it. But when Atzilus will then go down into the Bria Tzir Nasiya, and the Bria Tzir Nasiya, to understand, they come from a state which do not show any godliness. This looks, a Bria is something which is not God. That's what it's the definition of the Bria, is that it's the creation of God. The creator is over there, the creation is over there. God basically made something yesh mi ayin, which is so distinct from him as to look like something else. The only one who has the koach of creating something yesh mi'ayin is the essence itself. Even Atzilus does not have the power to create something yesh mi'ayin, even though it's totally godly. It doesn't have the ability to make something yesh mi'ayin. Only God has the ability to make something yesh mi'ayin. You with me? So in the realm of yesh mi'ayin, which is the bria, yitzir and asiyah, you have the koach of the atzmus in there, because otherwise, where do they come from? Only atzmus can create such a thing. Therefore, when Atzilus will have a little shlichus and go down and cloak itself into the bria, the Atzilus itself now has access to the atzmus, which it didn't have when it was in its own place. I can say that again if you didn't understand. Right, one more time. Right, when Atzilus is just hanging out in Atzilus, it's a step down from the atzmus and has no access to the atzmus. Okay, it's finite compared to infinite. But when the atzmus decides to create a world lower than Atzilus, which basically means God manifests himself as something other than God for the first time, the ability for God to present himself as something independent of God is a koach that only God can do, only the essence of God can do. It's such a wondrous thing. Atzilus alone cannot suddenly create the bria. It doesn't come from Atzilus. Only the essence of Hashem can create a bria, something from nothing, right? Just like you, for example, you can't make something from nothing, right? You can sort of make something from something, but the Eibusher has the koach to mamish make something from nothing. So in the something that he made from nothing, even though it's as low can be, that's the whole point. It shows on no godliness whatsoever. That's the whole concept of it, is that it looks independent. But the reality is the only one who can make such a thing look independent is the essence of Hashem himself. And therefore, like hanging out in the state of independence is reverberating the essence of God. That's where it's found, because it's the source of its being there. Therefore, now Atzilus decides, I want the essence of God. How am I going to get my hands on it? So he goes down into the bria, and this is the idea of Matan Torah, right? The angel all said, "Give your Torah to us. Ten hodach al shamayim. We want the Torah." Moshe said, "Let me try you out of them. Aveim yesh lachem." Did you go so low? The Torah is not going to do you any good. The Torah wants to go down into a world of separation. The Torah is essentially Atzilus, right? When it comes down to a world of separation, just like with Atzilus, it suddenly has access to the essence of God, because that's where the essence of God basically is hanging out. And therefore, this soul has an aliyah when it goes into the levushim. When your soul's sitting in Atzilus land, it's very nice. It's a godly being, but it doesn't have any access to the essence. When it crawls down into the garments of the Torah, the 613 thought, speech, and action of the Torah, suddenly it can hold on to God's essence. And that's what we say, it's better 1 minute, 1 hour in this world of tshuva, the whole world to come. How do you make sense of such a statement? Because in this world you have access to the essence of God, even for 1 second, right? So your garments elevates you to a place that you could not go without them. Yalla.
That's what God does.
So our soul, not in this world, is disconnected to God.
Yeah.
And here in
Yes.
the lower world,
Yes.
is connected.
That's
to God
right.
by mitzvot.
That's right. That's right. Shivim Shmorim Shana, you have 70, 80 years. That's why Kol Nashim of Nashim Tahalukau. If we only knew, we'd be in a state of like constant praise to Hashem of the kindness that we have in this world. And here we're busy complaining all the time. It comes naturally because he's hiding here. But if you can break through this concealment and realize that in the very place that he's hiding is his most greatest essence, you'd be in a state of continuous joy all the time. And this is the idea of Chassidus brings this idea out, right? So when you see a picture of Chassidim, you see them dancing, right? Because the idea is that it takes all darkness away. The Indian of Chassidus is called it's the study of the mitzvah of Achdus Hashem. What is Achdus Hashem? To negate the duality, right? You might think that there's good and evil. You might think there's creation and God. How could you not think that, right? It's all over the place. But Achdus Hashem is a mitzvah. Da es Elokei avicha. You have to know the God of your fathers, which means to understand how he's one. With this understanding, not only do you see that he's one in the place of darkness, darkness is a greater state of godly revelation than even light, and therefore you're dancing, right? You're just a happy Jew. There's nowhere, you can't get away from it. So this is why learning Chassidus basically changes your whole approach to Avodas Hashem. You're just doing a different thing all of a sudden. You have a different perspective. Okay. Fine. We're done. See you tomorrow.
That's crazy. It was an expulsion from Gan Eden. God is arguably the